Dr. Riven Astor had seen some strange things in his tenure aboard the Jovian Atmosphere Research Station, but brainwave patterns dancing to the tune of "What the hell is this?" were a new one. He massaged his temples, staring at the holographic display like it owed him money. "You know," he muttered to the empty lab, "if I'd wanted a headache, I'd just have talked to my ex." The station hung in Jupiter's embrace like a mosquito in an elephant's armpit, all tin can and bravado. The crew, a motley collection of misfits and geniuses, and if you couldn't spot where one ended and the other began, you probably belonged here. Astor fit right in, though not without a few choice words about the cafeteria's excuse for coffee. 100 years in the future and they still can't get the damn beans right, he'd lamented to anyone within earshot. Today, however, caffeine deficiencies had to take a back seat. Astor had bigger fish to fry, or at least mildly annoy. The lab door hissed open and in walked Chief Engineer Kylan Thrace, whose approach to life was much like his approach to machinery. Hit it hard enough, and if it doesn't work, you've found the problem. "Riven," he said, pausing to wipe grease-stained hands on his equally stained overalls. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Ghosts I can handle," Riven replied, gesturing at the display. This is like watching your grandmother twerk." Kylan peered over his shoulder, squinting at the lines and squiggles that were supposed to represent something rational. "I'll take your word for it. You think it's interference from, he waggled his fingers, "up there." "Depends," Riven said, eyebrows raised. "Are you planning to start a cult to worship our new brainwave overlords?" "Maybe, if they can do something about the coffee," Kylan replied with a grin. "Should we tell the captain?" Riven considered it, but the idea of explaining anomalies that made no sense to a man whose face had all the warmth of a dying star wasn't appealing. "Let's hold off. I want to run a few more tests first. Besides, Captain Voss isn't known for his sunny demeanor." "Fair point," Kylan agreed, backing towards the door. "Let me know if your dancing brainwaves start doing the Macarena. We might have a real party then." Alone again, Riven turned back to the display. He tapped a few buttons, cycling through data that looked like the world's most boring heartbeat. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like an itch in the back of his mind that refused to go away. But for now, all he had were numbers, and numbers weren't known for their conversational skills. Meanwhile, across the station, Security Chief Mara Lynn was dealing with her own brand of nonsense. "I'm telling you," she said into her comm, "if one more person reroutes power from the security grid to run a damn coffee maker, I'm going to start throwing things. Heavy things." "Copy that," came the overwrought sigh of her deputy. "I'll make sure to wear a helmet." Mara clicked off the comm and surveyed the corridor, her gaze lingering on a flickering light panel. It buzzed like an angry wasp, promising a headache for anyone unfortunate enough to stand underneath it too long. "Perfect," she muttered. "Just what we need. Mood lighting." Back in the lab, Riven was having a revelation of sorts. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, as if he were about to outsmart the universe. "All right," he said aloud, "let's see what you've got for me." With a few taps, he brought up the latest scans, brainwaves collected from the crew over the past few weeks. There were spikes, troughs, and a few suspiciously rhythmic patterns that reminded him of that time he walked in on Kylan dancing in the engineering bay, wearing nothing but a tool belt and a smile. "Never again," he promised the empty air. But jokes aside, this was serious. Anomalies in brainwave patterns weren't just curious, they were potentially catastrophic. Worst-case scenario, alien influence. Best-case scenario, they'd all been drinking the same bad batch of coffee. Either way, it wasn't going to win any awards for most inspiring day at work. He was about to dive deeper into the data when the lab door hissed open again, this time admitting Captain Elias Voss himself, a man whose presence often felt like an impending audit. "Doctor," Voss said, a nod passing as both greeting and warning. "I hear you've got something interesting." Riven cleared his throat, adopting the tone of a man who'd been caught Googling symptoms late at night. Interesting is one word for it, Captain. Disturbing might be another. Is that so? Voss leaned over the console, eyes narrowing at the display. Explain. Riven took a breath, gesturing at the tangled mess of data. We've got anomalies in the crew's brainwave patterns. Could be nothing, could be something. But let's just say if I were superstitious, I'd be buying holy water by the caseload. Voss's expression didn't change, but Riven could sense the gears turning. Do we have any evidence of outside interference? Not yet, Riven admitted. And I hate to shout aliens without a good reason. Makes one look like a nutter. Voss straightened, his gaze still locked on the display. Keep me informed, Doctor. If there's something out there, or in here, I want to know about it. Riven nodded, watching as Voss departed, leaving behind the faint scent of aftershave and anxiety. Alone once more, he considered the task at hand. Well, he said to no one in particular, let's see what deep space has to say for itself. Meanwhile, in the engineering bay, Kylan was elbow-deep in what could charitably be called a maintenance check, and uncharitably be called fixing the crap someone else broke. Hinges squealed in protest as he yanked a panel loose, revealing a tangle of wires that had all the charm of a bowl of spaghetti left out in the sun. You know, Kylan commented to his assistant, a young tech named Ivo who'd yet to learn the fine art of sarcasm, when I signed up for this gig, I thought I'd be like one of those cool guys in the movies. You know, with gadgets and explosions. Ivo, who was holding a flashlight like it was a live grenade, blinked owlishly. And turns out, Kylan grunted, I'm just a glorified janitor with better tools. The intercom crackled to life, Mara's voice cutting through the static like a knife through butter. Thrace, I've got a light panel down in Sector 12. It's doing that thing again. Kylan sighed, rolling his eyes heavenward. On it, Chief. Can't have the mood lighting ruining our grim dystopian aesthetic, can we? Wouldn't dream of it, Mara replied dryly. Oh, and Riven's been poking around with those brainwave anomalies. Thinks there might be a story there. Riven's always finding stories, Kylan said, reaching for a tool that looked like it belonged in a medieval torture chamber. Just hope it's a happy ending for once. In this place, Mara laughed. Not likely. As Kylan and Ivo packed up their gear, a sense of foreboding hung in the air, thick as the oil stains on Kylan's overalls. Something was wrong on the station, something bigger than flickering lights and faulty wiring. And if there was one thing Kylan knew, it was that problems didn't stay contained. They spread like rust or bad gossip. Back in the lab, Riven was engrossed in his data, trying to ignore the creeping suspicion that he was about to stumble onto something he'd wish he hadn't. Come on, he muttered, scanning through the streams of information. Talk to me. Tell me what you are. The numbers flickered in response, a dizzying dance of uncertainty. Riven leaned back, eyes tracing patterns that seemed to defy logic. And then, just as he was about to give up for the day, something clicked, a realization. An insight that sent a shiver down his spine. He scrambled for his comm, fingers fumbling over the buttons. Mara, Kylan, anyone who'll listen, get to the lab now. I think I know what's going on. The reply was swift, Mara's voice laced with a mix of curiosity and concern. On our way, Riven. What's the rush? I've got a theory, he said, breathless with the kind of excitement that bordered on panic. And I think it's gonna make our lives a whole lot more complicated. As he waited for the others to arrive, Riven stared at the data, feeling a mix of dread and determination. He'd come to Jupiter for research, for answers, for the thrill of discovery. But now, as the station hummed its mechanical tune around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger, something with stakes far beyond what any of them had signed up for. Well, he sighed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. At least it won't be boring. In the corridors, Kylan and Mara were already making their way towards the lab, each with their own thoughts and worries. You think he's onto something? Mara asked, glancing at Kylan as they rounded a corner. Kylan shrugged, though his expression was serious. If Riven's got that look in his eyes, it's either genius or madness, or both. They reached the lab door just as it hissed open, revealing Riven with an expression that was equal parts exhilaration and terror. "Welcome to the party," he said, gesturing them inside. "Hope you brought something to drink." Mara raised an eyebrow as they stepped into the lab, the tension in the air almost palpable. "All right, Riven, what's got you all worked up?" Riven pointed at the display, a new set of data scrolling across the screen like the opening credits to a horror film. "I've found a pattern," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "These brainwaves, they're not just anomalies. They're signals." Kylan and Mara exchanged glances, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a shroud. "Signals?" Kylan repeated, skepticism tinged with curiosity. "Yeah," Riven confirmed, his eyes alight with a mix of fear and excitement. "And if I'm right, we're not alone out here." The room fell silent, the implications hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, no one spoke, each lost in their own thoughts of what this could mean for the station, for humanity, for everything. Finally, Mara broke the silence, her voice steady despite the tumultuous thoughts swirling in her mind. "Well, if it's aliens, I hope they're friendly." Kylan snorted, the sound breaking the tension like a bullet through glass. "Or at least bring better coffee." Riven chuckled, though the laugh was tinged with unease. "Let's hope," he said, turning back to the display, "because if they are not, we're in for one hell of a ride." And with that, the trio stood together, facing the unknown with a mix of dread and determination. Whatever came next, they knew one thing for certain: it wasn't going to be boring. The Jovian Atmosphere Research Station was humming along like a hungover bumblebee in a tin can, impressive only in its persistence. Talia Voss, the station's second engineer and Captain Elias Voss's younger sister, was knee-deep in a mess of cables that looked like the offspring of a bad marriage between a spaghetti monster and an electrical fire. She cursed under her breath, something inventive involving a wrench and an improbable anatomical location, as another spark flew from the panel in front of her. Just another day in this glorious flying dustbin. The joys of space travel. Talia had been feeling a bit off lately, more than usual. The kind of off that made you question whether the world was real or just a particularly bad episode of an old Earth sitcom. Nightmares. Vivid and relentless, like a filmmaker with a penchant for the macabre had set up shop in her subconscious. "Hey, Talia," came the voice of Ivo, who was currently trying to be useful by holding a flashlight steady, failing miserably at both. "You look worse than last week's meatloaf surprise." "Thanks, Ivo," she replied, not bothering to look up. "Your concern is truly heartwarming, makes me feel all fuzzy inside, like a mold colony." Ivo shrugged, a motion that was more of a twitch. "Just saying, maybe get some sleep," Talia snorted. "Sleep? Oh, Ivo, sweet summer child, that's how they get you." "Who?" he asked, forehead crinkling with confusion. "Whoever's responsible for these nightmares," Talia shot back, yanking another wire with more force than necessary. "Probably the same bastards who supply the coffee." Out in the corridor, another flickering light cast ominous shadows, like a terrible horror movie without the budget for decent effects. Mara was passing by, muttering something about haunted house chic being the new aesthetic. She poked her head into the room, spotting Talia and Ivo amidst the chaos. "How's the patient?" Mara asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Mostly dead," Talia replied, her voice muffled as she buried her head in the panel. "But aren't we all?" Mara chuckled darkly. "Speak for yourself. I'm still holding out for a miracle." "Keep hoping," Talia said, finally shifting back to sit on her heels. "Or a better coffee blend, whichever comes first." Mara's expression turned more serious, her usual sarcasm giving way to a flicker of concern. "You okay, Talia? You've been looking, well, worse than usual." "Nightmares," Talia admitted with a shrug, trying to play it off. "Keeps me company when the universe gets boring." Mara nodded. "You're not the only one. A few others have mentioned the same thing. Could be connected to the power fluctuations." Fluctuations. Now that was interesting. Or at least more interesting than another night of vivid nightmares where she was chased by creatures that would make a Lovecraftian monster look like a house pet. Mara nodded again, stepping further into the room. "Yeah, Every time the lights flicker or systems glitch, someone reports a nightmare. Almost like the station's feeding off our bad dreams. Talia frowned, her mind racing through the implications. So what? The station's become some kind of parasitic horror story theme park. Wouldn't be the first time someone messed up the wiring, Mara said with a wry grin. Could be worse. Could be clowns. God, I hate clowns, Talia muttered, suppressing a shiver. Always had a feeling about them. And not the good kind. Join the club, Mara replied dryly. Anyway, we're trying to figure out if there's a connection. Maybe Riven can find something in his brainwave data. Riven's got enough on his plate, Talia said, thinking of the scientist with a tendency to overthink and undersleep. But I'll mention it. Maybe we can put our heads together and come up with a plan that's not run and scream. Mara nodded, approving. Good. We'll need everyone on board if we're going to get to the bottom of this. As Mara left, Talia leaned back into her work, her mind buzzing with possibilities. She was no stranger to weirdness, the kind that made you question if space was really the final frontier or just another layer of absurdity. But this was new and unnerving. If the station was siphoning off nightmares, harvesting them like some energy source, what else could it be doing? And who or what was behind it? The questions gnawed at her as she worked, becoming a background hum of dread that refused to be silenced. It was one thing to deal with faulty wiring and malfunctioning systems, but this was beyond the usual headaches of life on the edge of space. Finally, unable to ignore the pull of curiosity, Talia packed up her tools and made her way to Riven's lab. If anyone could make sense of the mess they found themselves in, it was the man who'd once tried to use a coffee pot to predict solar flares. It hadn't worked, but damn if he hadn't been enthusiastic about it. She found Riven hunched over his console, eyes glued to the display like it held the secrets of the universe, or at least the answer to why the coffee tasted like burnt despair. He didn't look up as she entered, too absorbed in his work to notice anything short of a supernova. Riven, Talia said, knocking lightly on the metal doorframe. Got a minute? For you always, Riven replied, finally tearing his gaze away. What's up? Nightmares, she said simply, watching his expression shift from curiosity to alarm. Power fluctuations. We've got a theory that the two might be connected. Riven leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Interesting, and by interesting I mean deeply unsettling. Yeah, tell me about it, Talia agreed, crossing her arms. Mara said a few others have reported the same thing. Nightmares coinciding with system glitches, like the station's feeding off us. Riven's eyes narrowed, the gears in his mind visibly turning. If that's true, it could mean the station's systems are being manipulated, maybe even reprogrammed. Reprogrammed by what? Talia asked, though a part of her was already running through the possibilities. None of them good. No idea, Riven admitted, a hint of frustration in his voice. But if we can trace the patterns, isolate the source, we might be able to shut it down. Think you can do it? Talia asked, a note of hope creeping into her voice despite herself. Riven smiled ruefully. I'll give it a shot. Just need to run a few more tests. Maybe cross-reference the brainwave data with the power logs. Great, Talia said, feeling a bit lighter. Let me know if you need help. I'm not much for science, but I'm pretty good with a wrench. I'll keep that in mind, Riven replied, already turning back to his console. Thanks, Talia, she nodded, making her way back to the corridor. As she walked, the familiar hum of the station resonated around her, a reminder of the uneasy balance they maintained in this vast, uncaring cosmos. The nightmares were just the beginning, she knew, a symptom of something far more complex and dangerous than they'd ever anticipated. But they were a start, a thread to follow through the labyrinthine mysteries of the station. And if there was one thing Talia Voss had never been good at, it was ignoring a challenge. Back in the engineering bay, Kylan was still in his natural habitat, surrounded by machines and chaos, a wrench in one hand and what looked like a half-eaten sandwich in the other. Hey, Kylan, Talia greeted, dropping into a chair with a sigh. Have a minute? Sure, Kylan replied through a mouthful of sandwich. What do you need? other than decent food and a better job. Nightmares, Talia said, watching his expression shift from blasé to mildly interested. And power fluctuations. Kylan swallowed, setting down the sandwich. Heard a bit about that. You thinking they're connected? Maybe, Talia replied, recounting her conversation with Mara and Riven. If the stations feeding off our nightmares could explain the glitches. Like it's overloading the systems. Kylan nodded, thoughtful. Makes sense. And by makes sense, I mean it doesn't at all, but that's par for the course out here. Exactly, Talia said, rubbing her temples. Riven's looking into it, but if you notice anything weird, let me know. I will, Kylan promised, already turning back to his work. And hey, Talia, yeah, try and get some sleep, Kylan advised, a rare note of sincerity in his voice. You're no good to us as a zombie, even if it is the station's latest trend. Talia managed a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. I'll do my best, but if I start craving brains, you have my permission to put me out of my misery. Kylan chuckled, a sound like gravel on metal. Deal. As she left the bay, Talia couldn't help but wonder what the next night would bring. More nightmares, more system glitches, or something far worse lurking in the shadows of their makeshift home. Whatever it was, she knew one thing for certain: they'd face it together. After all, what was space without a little bit of camaraderie and a good dose of gallows humor? The Jovian Atmosphere Research Station, affectionately known by the crew as JARS. Because what better way to describe their existence than something that holds a sticky mess, was home to a group of individuals who had long since given up on the idea of normality. Once, they had been sent here to conduct experiments on Jupiter's ever-elusive atmospheric phenomena. Now, it seemed the station itself had decided to turn them into guinea pigs for its own bizarre machinations. So here they were, dealing with nightmares that wouldn't quit, a coffee supply that was borderline toxic. And now, as if the station needed more of a reason to make them miserable, the idea that their dreams were being harvested like cash crops. Talia leaned against the cold, metal wall outside Riven's lab, trying not to focus too hard on the fact that the station felt like it was breathing around her. Just the usual existential dread, nothing a stiff drink couldn't fix, or would have fixed, if they hadn't run out of anything remotely drinkable weeks ago. Inside, Riven was busy with what Talia could only describe as mad scientist chic. A wide array of holographic displays filled the room, each flickering with streams of data that looked just as exhausting as they felt. Riven himself was in the center, frantically typing into a console with the fervor of a man living on caffeine fumes and raw determination. We're all set, Riven said, swiveling around to face Talia. Got some experimental tech. Thought we'd try blocking the nightmares. Experimental. Talia raised an eyebrow, taking a cautious step inside. Should I be worried about side effects? Like, I don't know, spontaneous combustion or turning into a jellyfish? Nothing that exciting, Riven assured her, though his expression didn't do much to instill confidence. Worst case, you might experience mild nausea or an increased craving for bad coffee. So, business as usual, Talia quipped, folding her arms. How does it work? Riven gestured to a small device that looked like a cross between a VR headset and a medieval torture device. This, he explained, should shield your brainwaves from any unwanted interference. Just pop it on before bed. Yeah, because who doesn't want to sleep with a toaster on their head, Talia muttered, picking up the device. Hope it comes with a warranty. Think of it as a temporary solution, Riven advised. I'm still digging through the data trying to map the exact patterns we're dealing with, but it's a start. And if it doesn't work, Riven shrugged, then we move on to Plan B or Plan C. Or God forbid Plan Z. Comforting, Talia deadpanned. Anything else I should know? Well, Riven hesitated. Oren Fisk, my ever-optimistic colleague, proposed a more invasive approach. Invasive how? Talia asked, suspicion prickling her spine. Genetic modification, Riven replied tersely. He thinks we might be able to tweak our genes to resist whatever's causing the nightmares. Talia blinked, trying to process the insanity of what she'd just heard. Genetic modification, like turning us into some kind of space mutants. Oren's words, not mine, Riven clarified quickly. But it's risky and untested. I'm not even sure it's legal. Legal, Talia laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. We're in the middle of nowhere, Riven. I doubt the space police are going to show up with warrants. Even so, Riven said, it's not something I'd recommend, yet. Well, let's stick with the toaster helmets for now, Talia suggested, setting the device back down. I'd rather not play Frankenstein unless absolutely necessary. Agreed, Riven nodded. Besides, I've got a good feeling about these. Good feeling. From the guy who tried to make coffee predict the weather, Talia snorted. Forgive me if I'm not exactly reassured. Hey, that was a perfectly valid hypothesis, Riven defended, though he couldn't help but grin. Still, if you need anything, let me know. Will do, Talia said, making her way back toward the door. And Riven? Yeah, try to get some rest, will you? She advised. You look like you've been mainlining space insomnia. Rest, Riven echoed, an incredulous look on his face. What's that? Exactly, Talia replied, with a smirk before stepping out into the corridor. In the engineering bay, she found Kylan fiddling with a particularly stubborn piece of equipment, a task that seemed to involve more swearing than actual engineering. The usual background hum of machinery droned on, a familiar, comforting noise in their little slice of chaos. Hey, Kylan, Talia called, grabbing his attention. Got a new toy for you. A toy? Kylan asked, glancing up from the wiring mess. Please tell me it involves explosives. Sorry to disappoint, Talia said, tossing him one of the experimental devices. Think of it as a dream blocker. Kylan examined the gadget with a skeptical eye. I didn't know tinfoil hats got an upgrade. Riven's idea, Talia explained, leaning against a console. Supposed to keep the nightmares at bay. Worth a shot, at least. So, how does it work? Kylan asked, turning it over with the curiosity of a man who'd taken apart more things than he could remember. You wear it while you sleep, Talia shrugged. It shields your brainwaves or something. Science stuff. Right, Kylan said. Because what could go wrong with experimenting on sleep-deprived engineers in space? My thoughts exactly, Talia replied dryly. But if it helps, maybe we can keep the station from turning us into its own horror movie cast. Kylan grinned, his usual cynical humor returning. I always wanted to be the guy who dies first. Not if I can help it, Talia responded, crossing her arms. Anyway, keep an eye on the power grids. If those glitches start up again, I want to know. You got it, boss, Kylan agreed, setting the device aside. And hey, Talia. Yeah. Don't let this place get to you, Kylan said, in a rare moment of sincerity. Just remember, we're all in the same sinking ship. Thanks, Talia replied, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Good to know we're all drowning together. As she left the bay, the station seemed to groan around her, a disquieting reminder that it was alive in ways they didn't fully understand. The nightmares were just one piece of a puzzle she wasn't sure they were equipped to solve, but at least they were trying. In their own, wonderfully dysfunctional way. Later that night, Talia found herself in her quarters, staring warily at the contraption she was supposed to wear to bed. It was either that or face another night of twisted dreams and waking terror. With a resigned sigh, she slipped it on, feeling the cool metal press against her temples. Here's hoping this isn't the last stupid thing I do, she murmured, before flopping onto her bunk and shutting her eyes. Falling asleep was easier said than done, like trying to ignore the nagging feeling that you were being watched. Eventually, exhaustion won out, dragging her into the depths of slumber. The nightmares came as they always did, dark, chaotic scenes that twisted reality into something unrecognizable. Only this time something was different. The shadows seemed to recoil as if blocked by an unseen barrier. The usual oppressive weight of fear lightened just a fraction. It was working, sort of, until it wasn't. The darkness surged, pressing against the barrier, testing it, probing it like a predator challenging a cage. And then, with a jarring snap, it broke through. Talia woke with a gasp, the device slipping off her head as she bolted upright. Heart pounding, she struggled to shake off the residual terror, her mind a jumbled mess of fractured images and half-remembered dread. "Damn it," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. "So much for a peaceful night." The calm crackled to life, startling her. "Talia," it was Riven, sounding as bleary as she felt. "You awake?" "More or less," Talia replied, dragging herself out of bed. "What's up?" "Meet me in the lab," Riven said, his voice tense. "We had a development." "Be right there," Talia promised, pulling on her boots. As she made her way through the dimly lit corridors, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The station felt different, more alive, if that was even possible. Like it was aware of their attempts to counter its influence and had decided to up the ante. In the lab, Riven was hunched over his console, a look of grim determination on his face. "Talia," he greeted, barely glancing up. "Things just got more complicated." "Of course they did," Talia sighed, joining him. "What happened?" "The alien influence," Riven explained, tapping a few keys to bring up a display. "It's adapting. Whatever's causing the nightmares, it's learned how to bypass the blockers." "Fantastic," Talia muttered, staring at the data. "So our high-tech nap hats are useless." "Not entirely," Riven said. "They're still collecting data. I've been able to trace some of the patterns, analyze the signals." "And?" Talia prompted. "And it's definitely not random," Riven replied, his voice tight with frustration. "They're targeting specific individuals, amplifying the fear response." "Targeting us," Talia repeated, a chill running down her spine. "Why?" "Could be a test," Riven theorized. "Or a way to weaken us, make us more susceptible to influence." "Great," Talia groaned, rubbing her temples. "So we're basically lab rats for some cosmic horror show." "Pretty much," Riven agreed with a humorless chuckle. "But I've got an idea." "Another one?" Talia asked, eyebrow raised. "Yeah," Riven nodded. "If we can isolate the source of the signal, we might be able to disrupt it, send something back to scramble their frequencies." "You're talking about a counterattack," Talia realized. "Exactly," Riven confirmed. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot." "Well, I'm all for sticking it to the bastards," Talia said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "Let's do it." As Riven started to outline his plan, Talia couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They were in over their heads, sure, but this crew of misfits and mad scientists had a way of rising to the challenge, even if it meant facing down the nightmares themselves. Talia stared at the holographic projection of Jupiter spinning lazily in the air above Riven's console. It was a pretty sight, sure, but right now it felt as useful as a chocolate teapot. She'd come here for answers, not to admire gas giants. "So, Riven," she started, trying to keep the sarcasm from smothering the last thread of hope she had. "What's the plan?" "Do we throw rocks at them until they get bored and leave?" Riven didn't look up, still absorbed in the mesmerizing dance of data across his screen. "Unfortunately, our rock collection is sorely lacking. I've got something else in mind, though." "Do tell," Talia said, folding her arms. "I'm all ears for whatever harebrained scheme you cooked up this time." "Remember those brainwave blockers?" Riven asked, fiddling with a mess of wires. "They might not be perfect, but they collect data, and that data shows patterns we can exploit." "Exploit? Sounds like we're about to turn into those mad scientists you see in old horror films." "Well, if the cliché lab coat fits," Riven deadpanned. "The blockers picked up brainwave frequencies, essentially a language of sorts. If we can mimic it, maybe we can send a message back." "Send a message?" Talia echoed, incredulous. "Like, please stop giving us nightmares. More like bugger off and leave us alone," Riven said with a grim grin. "But first we need to isolate the source of the signal." "And how do we do that?" Talia asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's where things get tricky," Riven admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "We'll need to boost the station's sensors, get a clearer picture of where the signal's coming from." "Fantastic," Talia sighed. "Because, you know, our tech is always so reliable." Riven snorted. "Tell me about it. But it's the only shot we've got at finding out who's pulling the strings." "We're already dancing on their stage," Talia muttered. "Might as well yank on the curtain while we're at it." As they plotted their next move, the station's lighting flickered ominously, a dim reminder of their precarious situation. Talia glanced up, half expecting the ceiling to cave in. Great, just what we need. More atmospheric mood lighting. Riven tapped a few buttons on his console, his frown deepening. Looks like the power's fluctuating again. Kylan's gonna love this. I'll check in with him, Talia offered, already heading for the door. Let me know if you come up with any more brilliant ideas. Oh, don't worry, Riven called after her. Brilliance is my middle name. Pretty sure it's oblivious, Talia shot back with a smirk, stepping into the hallway. The corridors of Jars had always been a bit too narrow for her liking, like the station had been designed by someone who didn't actually like people all that much. But now they felt even more oppressive, the walls practically closing in with every step. More than once, she caught herself glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting to find a shadow creeping up behind her. In the engineering bay, she found Kylan and Talia Voss, Captain Voss's younger sister, knee-deep in wires and circuits. The place was a mess, which was honestly its default state, but today it looked like a hurricane had blown through. Hey, Kylan, Talia called out, navigating the obstacle course of discarded tools and half-finished projects. We've got a problem. Which one? Kylan replied without looking up, his voice muffled by the panel he was buried in. The power fluctuations, Talia explained, leaning against a nearby console. Riven thinks we might be able to trace the nightmare signals if we boost our sensors. Think you can work your magic? Magic, Kylan laughed, finally emerging from the guts of the machine, grease smudged across his face like war paint. I'm a mechanic, not a wizard, Talia. Well, if you can pull this off, you'll be both, she said, tossing him a rag. Kylan wiped his hands, glancing at Talia Voss. What do you think, Talia? Up for a bit of engineering sorcery, Talia Voss shrugged, a slight smile playing on her lips. Why not? It's not like we have anything better to do. Besides survive, Kylan added dryly. Always a plus, Talia agreed. I'll leave you two to it. I've got a date with the station's mainframe. Never thought I'd be jealous of a computer, Kylan quipped. Trust me, it's a one-time thing, Talia replied, heading back to the corridors. As she walked away, she heard them already getting to work, their banter a comforting reminder that they were all in this together. In the control room, Talia sat at the console, fingers flying over the touchpad. She could feel the station's pulse through the keyboard, a rhythmic thrum that resonated beneath her skin. It was reassuring in a way, like holding hands with a dying giant. Let's see what makes you tick, she murmured, bringing up the diagnostic reports. The station's systems were a patchwork quilt of old and new, jury-rigged by generations of engineers who'd probably spent more time swearing at the tech than actually fixing it. Talia could sympathize. She'd lost track of how many times she'd cursed this tin can, usually under her breath, because apparently the station had ears too. As she sifted through the data, something caught her eye, a series of fluctuations in the power grid, synchronized with the nightmare signals Riven had identified. It was subtle, like a whisper in a storm, but it was there. Huh, she muttered, leaning closer. So that's what you're hiding. The comm panel crackled to life, Kylan's voice coming through. Talia, you there? Yeah, Talia replied, still focused on the screen. I've got something. The power fluctuations, it's like the station's breathing in time with the signals. Breathing? Kylan repeated, skepticism coloring his tone. Yeah, Talia said, biting her lip. Like it's alive, but what if it's not just the station? What if it's the whole damn planet? There was a pause on the line as Kylan processed her words. You're saying Jupiter's got a pulse, maybe, Talia conceded. Or maybe we're just too small to see the bigger picture. Great, Kylan sighed, as if existential dread wasn't already on my to-do list. Welcome to the club, Talia said, unable to suppress a grim smile. I'll upload the data to Riven. Maybe he can make sense of it. Good luck, Kylan replied. With any luck, we'll have these sensors boosted before we're all fried. Talia cut the connection, focusing on her task. It was like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces were missing and the rest had been chewed by the dog. But slowly, bit by bit, a picture began to emerge. The signals were coming from somewhere deep within Jupiter's atmosphere, an impenetrable soup of gas and pressure that no human had ever crossed. Whatever was down there, it was old and vast and angry. "We're out of our depth," she muttered to herself. "Way out." When the upload finished, she leaned back, rubbing her eyes. Her head was pounding, a dull, insistent throb that wouldn't quit. She knew she should probably get some sleep, but the thought of closing her eyes made her shudder. The nightmares were always waiting, just beyond the edge of consciousness, clawing at the walls of her mind with a malevolence she couldn't comprehend. But if Riven was right, if they could somehow fight back, "Then we'll show them what humans are made of," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the station. And it's not fear. Later, she found Kylan and Talia Voss still hard at work, the air thick with the smell of burnt ozone and determination. "How's it going?" she asked, leaning against the wall. "Could be worse," Kylan grunted, tightening a bolt. "Could be better too, but hey, that's life." "Tell me about it," Talia Voss muttered from her position beneath a console. "We're rerouting power from non-essential systems. Should give the sensors the boost they need." "Good," Talia said, nodding. "How long until we're ready?" "An hour, maybe two," Kylan guessed. "Depends on whether the station decides to cooperate." "Let's hope it's feeling charitable," Talia replied. "Yeah, let's," Kylan agreed, wiping his brow. "Otherwise, we're up a certain creek without a paddle." They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the click of tools and the occasional curse when something didn't fit quite right. It was oddly comforting, this camaraderie born of desperation and duty. "Talia," Kylan spoke up eventually, breaking the quiet. "What if Riven's plan doesn't work?" Talia hesitated, considering her answer. "Then we keep trying," she said finally. "We're not beaten until we're dead." "Comforting thought," Kylan said, though his smile took the sting out of his words. "Always the optimist," Talia quipped, pushing herself away from the wall. "I'll check in with Riven, see if he's found anything." "Good luck," Talia Voss called after her, "and watch your step. This station's out to get us." "Ain't that the truth?" Talia replied with a wave, heading back to the lab. Inside, Riven was hunched over his console, the blue light casting shadows across his face. He glanced up as she entered, offering a weary smile. "Talia, any news?" "Sensors are almost ready," she reported. "Found anything on your end?" Riven nodded, gesturing to the screen. "The data you sent, it's incredible. The signals, they're not just communicating, they're feeding." "Feeding?" Talia echoed, feeling her skin crawl. "Yeah," Riven said, grimacing. "On us, our fear, our nightmares, it's like crack for whatever's down there." "Great," Talia muttered. "So we're just snack food." "Pretty much," Riven confirmed. "But here's the thing, they are dependent on those signals. If we can disrupt them, we might be able to starve them out." "Starve them out?" Talia repeated, surprised. "How?" "Well, it's not exactly simple," Riven admitted, rubbing his chin. "But if we can flood their frequencies with white noise, something to overwhelm their receptors, it might give us the upper hand." "Overload their senses," Talia said, catching on. "Like throwing a wrench into a machine." "Exactly," Riven agreed, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "But we need the sensors online to get a clear picture of their range and strength." "Then let's make it happen," Talia declared, feeling a surge of determination. "If this works, we'll turn the tables and give them a taste of their own medicine." As she turned to leave, Riven called out, "Hey, Talia." "Yeah," she replied, glancing back. "Thanks," Riven said, his voice soft, "for sticking with us." Talia shrugged, trying to play it off. "What else am I gonna do? Knit." He chuckled, the sound brightening the gloom. "Point taken." They shared a brief smile, a moment of shared resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind them why they fought, why they refused to give in to the darkness. As Talia made her way back to the engineering bay, the station seemed to breathe around her, a slow, steady rhythm that echoed her own heartbeat. It was a small comfort, but it was all she needed. They were human, after all. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving against the odds. The Jovian Atmosphere Research Station, affectionately known as JARS, because who doesn't love a good pun when you're teetering on the edge of oblivion? hummed with the kind of tense energy that suggested things were about to get worse before they got better. The station's corridors were a maze of flickering lights and occasional hisses of steam, like a haunted house designed by a committee of engineers with a penchant for melodrama. Talia Voss, who was getting thoroughly tired of being haunted by both her nightmares and the station's atmosphere, found herself pacing, 1,000 thoughts scrabbling for attention in her tired brain. Just as she was contemplating the merits of banging her head against the nearest bulkhead, Riven's voice crackled over the comms, dragging her back to the delightful reality at hand. Talia, we've got a situation, of course we do," she muttered, pressing the button to respond. "What now?" Did the coffee maker finally declare independence and establish its own dictatorship? "No," Riven replied, his voice tinged with an edge that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "It's worse. Much worse." "Oh joy," Talia sighed, heading towards the lab. "What fresh hell awaits us?" "Just get here," Riven urged, "and bring Kylan. I think it's time for everyone to have a group therapy session with reality." Talia found Kylan in the midst of a delicate negotiation with the station's ancient wiring, cursing it with the fervor of a man whose patience had long since evaporated. "Kylan," she called, waving him over. "Yeah." He extricated himself from the tangle of wires with the grace of a drunk octopus. "What's up? Riven's got a new crisis for us." "He sounds pretty shaken." "Shaken how?" Kylan asked, wiping his hands on his pants. "Like we're all gonna die shaken, or we're out of coffee shaken. Hard to tell with Riven." "His emotional scale doesn't include mild panic," Talia said with a wry grin, "but I'd wager it's closer to the former. Figures." Kylan grimaced, following her down the corridor. "I swear if this station isn't actively trying to kill us, it's just biding its time." They burst into the lab to find Riven staring at the holographic display, his face lit by the eerie blue glow of Jupiter. It was an image that never failed to remind them just how out of their depth they were, like ants trying to understand a thunderstorm. "What is it?" Talia asked, skirting around the console. Riven pointed at the display where a series of complex patterns flickered with an almost sentient malevolence. "The signals we've been tracking. They're increasing in intensity and they're not random. They're coordinated." Kylan echoed, scratching his chin. "You mean like little alien Morse code?" "Exactly," Riven confirmed. "And I think they're using the brainwave blockers to amplify their reach." "Well, that's just fantastic," Talia said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Anything else they're using? Our toothbrushes, the coffee mugs." "Funny you should mention that," Riven said, not really sounding amused. "I ran some diagnostics. The station's systems are operating outside normal parameters. It's like they're being manipulated." "So, what?" Kylan said. "The station's possessed," Riven shrugged, which was not particularly reassuring. "Think of it more like a puppet. And we're not the ones pulling the strings." "Lovely," Talia muttered, running a hand through her hair. "So what do? We need to boost the sensors and jam their frequencies, or at least disrupt them enough to cut their link," Riven said, glancing at them both. "But there's more. I think they've taken a real interest in our dear doctor, Aster." As if on cue, the lights flickered ominously, casting strange shadows across the room. "What do you mean, an interest?" Talia asked, eyebrow raised. "His brainwave patterns are spiking off the charts," Riven said, tapping the console. "It's like they're targeting him specifically." "Great," Kylan said, his voice heavy with irony. "Our only genius is the main course in an alien buffet. We need a plan," Talia said, trying to keep the panic at bay. "The sensors, the white noise, we need to make it happen, and fast. They didn't get the chance." The station lurched, throwing them off balance as alarms screeched to life. The holographic projection of Jupiter fluctuated wildly, casting grotesque shapes across the walls. "What now?" Talia shouted over the din. "Something's breached the outer hull," Riven said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Of course it has," Kylan grunted, grabbing hold of the console for support. "Can you isolate the breach?" Talia demanded, pulling herself upright. Riven's fingers flew across the console, his expression grim. Seals holding for now, but we won't last long. We've got to get to the core systems. As they made their way through the station, the world tilting around them, Talia couldn't help but think of how utterly absurd it all was. They were a handful of humans, stuck on a decaying tin can, trying to fight off a force they couldn't even comprehend. It was the stuff of bad holodramas, except the laughter track was missing. Reaching the core systems, they found Ivo and Mara trying to stabilize the power grid. "About time you got here," Mara said, her expression a mix of relief and exasperation. "Sorry," Talia replied. "Got held up by the end of the world." "Understandable," Ivo chimed in, holding a flashlight steady as Mara worked. "No time like the present to make a last stand." "Cut the chatter," Kylan said, diving straight into the mess of wires and circuits. "We need power to the sensors now." "On it," Mara replied, her hands moving with practiced ease. "We've got just enough juice if we divert from non-essentials, like oxygen." Riven asked dryly. "We'll cross that bridge when we're gasping for air," Talia replied. "Right now we need those sensors." As they worked, Talia felt a strange sort of calm settle over her. It was probably the adrenaline talking, but it felt good to be doing something, even if it was just delaying the inevitable. They were humans, damn it, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was defiance in the face of insurmountable odds. "Power routed," Mara announced, wiping sweat from her forehead. "How's that, Kylan?" The engineer grinned despite the situation. "Good enough for government work. Let's see if this works," Riven said, flipping a series of switches. The station shuddered, but the sensors blinked to life, casting a pale green glow across their faces. "Now what?" Ivo asked, peering at the chaotic display. "Now we find their frequency and jam it," Talia said, her voice steady. "And pray it's enough to kick them off our network." The room fell silent, save for the hum of the equipment and the distant groan of the station. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble with everything on the line. They all knew it, but none of them were willing to back down. "Got it," Riven exclaimed, triumph lighting up his features. "Frequency locked." Initiating white noise broadcast. The station shivered, a deep, resonant thrum that rattled their bones. For a moment, it felt as if the entire structure might tear itself apart, but then the noise settled into a pervasive hum, drowning out the alien signals. "Is it working?" Mara asked, her voice hopeful. "Too soon to tell," Riven said, watching the displays intently. "But it's a start." Talia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They'd done it. They'd struck back, albeit in the smallest of ways. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was something, and in this madness something was enough. As they stood there, catching their breath, Talia felt a surge of unexpected emotion. Not fear or despair, but something brighter, fiercer, hope. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, but it was there, flickering stubbornly in the darkness. "Looks like we're still here," Kylan said, his voice gruff but warm. "Against all odds," Talia replied, grinning despite herself. "Let's keep it that way," Riven said, adjusting his glasses. "We've got a lot of work ahead." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Mara said, her smile infectious. Together, they faced the challenges that lay ahead, not as individuals but as a team, a motley crew of humans determined to make their stand against the darkness. As the station groaned around them, Talia knew one thing for certain: they were far from defeated. And as long as they had breath in their bodies and fire in their hearts, they'd keep fighting. Because they were human, after all, stubborn, resilient, and undeniably alive. The Jovian Atmosphere Research Station, or JARS, continued its ominous symphony of creaks and groans, as if it were mocking the frantic humans within its bowels. Talia, Riven, Kylan, Mara, and Ivo huddled together in the dim glow of the flickering consoles, each one wearing an expression that screamed, "What fresh hell is this?" The white noise was holding for now, but everyone knew it was only a temporary measure. "All right," Talia groaned, rubbing her temples. "Let's lay everything out. We're dealing with an alien force turning our station into its personal playground, and apparently, they've got a thing for Riven's brainwaves." "Flattering," Riven muttered. sounding like a man who just found out he was the entree at a cannibal feast. "We need more than just white noise if we're gonna survive this," Kylan said, wrenching a seat from the wall and flipping it around. "Something that'll make these bastards think twice before messing with us," Mara snorted. "What are we gonna do, moon them through the porthole?" "No, but I like your spirit," Kylan replied, cracking a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We could try to overload their energy siphons, give them more juice than they can handle until they blow a fuse or whatever passes for a fuse with them." Talia raised her eyebrows. "You mean turn the station itself into one giant middle finger?" "Exactly," Kylan said, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "It's risky, though. We might blow this whole place sky high." "Sounds like a party," Ivo quipped, though his voice shook slightly. "But how do we even start with something like that?" "Good question," Riven said, leaning forward. "We need to find out how they're siphoning the energy. If we can overload the system they're using, we might just get the upper hand." "Right," Talia nodded, her mind racing. "But to do that we need to understand their patterns better, and to do that we need to get inside their heads." Mara groaned. "Please tell me you don't mean that literally." "Not literally, no," Talia said with a shrug. "But we need to observe. And that means stepping right into the lion's den." "Fantastic," Kylan said, his voice dripping with irony. Because being on the brink of annihilation wasn't thrilling enough. Talia stood, her eyes scanning the room. "We move carefully. We need to use Riven's tech to analyze and predict their data streams. If we can identify a pattern, we can exploit it." Riven nodded, adjusting his glasses. "I can modify the brainwave blockers to give us more data. It won't be pleasant, but it's a start." "Define not pleasant," Ivo said, looking wary. "Think migraine, but with extra existential dread," Riven replied cheerfully. "Sign me up," Mara muttered, crossing her arms. As Riven got to work, Talia felt the familiar weight of dread settle over her. They were gambling with their lives, and the odds weren't exactly in their favor. But what choice did they have? It was either fight back with everything they had or wait around to be cooked alive. "Okay," Riven said after a while, standing back from the console. "I've got the blockers set to collect the data we need. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing." "Let's get to it," Talia said, feeling the adrenaline surge through her veins again. "We've got to make these aliens regret ever picking a fight with humans." As they worked, the station seemed to breathe around them, an ever-present reminder of their precarious situation. Talia couldn't help but think of how absurd it all was. They were a handful of mismatched individuals stuck on a decaying station trying to outsmart an alien intellect. It was like a bad joke, but the punchline hadn't dropped yet. "Got the data streams," Riven called out, frowning at the display. "Now let's see what these bastards are up to." "Anything interesting?" Kylan asked, peering over his shoulder. "Depends on your definition of interesting," Riven replied. "But it looks like they're using a specific frequency range to tap into our systems. If we can overload that range, we can give them a taste of their own medicine," Talia finished, a grim smile on her face. "Exactly," Riven said, nodding. "But like I said, it's risky. We could end up taking the whole station with us." "Good thing I never planned on retiring to a quiet life anyway," Kylan said, cracking his knuckles. The crew worked together, calibrating the equipment and triple-checking the connections. It was all hands on deck now, and every person brought their unique skills to the table, whether it was Riven's technical expertise, Kylan's engineering prowess, or Talia's ability to keep them focused and motivated. As they set up the final adjustments, the station shuddered violently, as if it were reminding them of the stakes. "That's our cue," Mara said, her voice tight. "Are we sure about this?" Ivo asked, looking around at his crewmates. "No," Talia said with a shrug, "but when has certainty ever been a luxury we could afford?" "Fair point," Ivo conceded, swallowing hard. Riven finalized the setup, his fingers dancing over the controls. "All right, we're ready. Once we start this, there's no turning back." "Good," Talia said, her voice steady. "Means we won't second-guess ourselves." "Here goes nothing," Kylan muttered as Riven flipped the switch. The station groaned as the energy coursed through its veins, the lights flickering ominously. It was like they were trying to harness a storm with nothing but a metal umbrella. Talia felt the very air crackle with potential, a heady mix of fear and exhilaration. The alien frequency fluctuated wildly, the signals dancing erratically across the screen. "It's working," Riven exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Don't celebrate just yet," Mara warned. "We still need to maintain it long enough to do some real damage." The station continued to tremble, the walls singing a dirge of metal and power. Talia held her breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then it did. The energy blast surged, overwhelming the alien siphon with a violent intensity. The station shuddered as the feedback loop created a cascade of sparks and arcs of electricity. It was chaos, a glorious, terrifying chaos. "We're doing it," Ivo shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "Hold it steady," Talia ordered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Keep it steady." The room was bathed in a harsh, flickering light, the shadows dancing like wraiths. It was beautiful in a way, a testament to human ingenuity and tenacity, even in the face of certain doom. As the seconds dragged on, the alien signals began to falter, their coherence unraveling like a frayed thread. It was working. Against all odds, they were fighting back. Finally, the station began to stabilize, the tremors subsiding as the energy levels returned to normal. The alien frequency was gone, replaced by a blissful silence. "Did we do it?" Mara asked, her voice a whisper. Talia scanned the room, her heart pounding. "I think we did." A cheer erupted, the crew momentarily forgetting their exhaustion and fear. It was a small victory, but it was theirs, a beacon of hope in the vast, uncaring void of space. "Well," Kylan said, his voice thick with emotion, "I suppose that means I won't have to resort to writing my memoirs just yet." "I'd have read it," Riven said, a rare smile gracing his features. "You're a masochist," Kylan replied with a chuckle. As the adrenaline faded and reality set back in, Talia felt a flicker of doubt. They'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. The aliens wouldn't give up easily, and there was no telling what they'd try next. But for now, she allowed herself to bask in the moment. They'd done what seemed impossible. They'd struck a blow for humanity, and that was something worth celebrating. "Well, we're still here," Talia said, her voice strong. "And as long as we are, we'll keep fighting." "Damn straight," Mara agreed, her eyes shining with determination. Together they faced the unknown future with renewed resolve. They were far from beaten, and as long as they drew breath, they would stand defiant against the darkness. They were human, after all, imperfect, stubborn, and fiercely alive, and that was more than enough for now. The Jovian Atmosphere Research Station wasn't just a tin can floating in the middle of nowhere. It was their tin can, complete with all the quirks of a broken toaster and the ambience of a haunted house. The flickering lights and persistent groans were as much a part of their lives as the weak, bitter coffee they choked down every morning. But today was different. Today, they weren't just trying to keep the lights on. They were actively trying to overload an alien force so it would leave them the hell alone. "Okay, folks," Talia said, clapping her hands together with a cheerfulness that was as forced as the smile she wore. "It's time to play our trump card. Let's see if these aliens can handle the full glory of human nightmares." "Riven, how's it looking?" Riven, looking like a man who'd just been told he was the star of a reality show he never signed up for, glanced at his console. "The brainwave blockers are picking up all kinds of signals. If these aliens like nightmares so much, they're about to get a buffet of bad dreams. Why do I feel like we're serving them a 4-course meal of oh no with a side of holy shit?" Mara asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because that's exactly what we're doing," Kylan replied, not looking up from his work on the wiring. "It's not every day you weaponize your worst fears." Kind of poetic in a laugh so you don't cry sort of way. Ivo, who had been hovering near the console like a moth drawn to a particularly dangerous flame, swallowed loudly. "And what happens if it doesn't work?" "We die," Talia said deadpan. But we do it with style. Great, Ivo muttered. I'll make sure to wear my best terrified expression. The plan, such as it was, hinged on the notion that the aliens were siphoning off their dreams, using them as fuel or entertainment. Riven wasn't exactly sure, but it was something creepy, and that was good enough. The idea was to overload their circuits with raw, unfiltered human emotion, the kind that fueled sleepless nights and therapy sessions. "Start the upload," Talia commanded, her voice firm, though her hands were shaking slightly. "Let's see if we can give these bastards a taste of good old-fashioned human terror." Riven initiated the process, and almost immediately the station thrummed with an eerie energy. Their nightmares, those deeply personal fears and anxieties that they'd each tried to bury, were now being broadcasted into the ether, a siren call of chaos. "Feels weird," Mara said, her eyes wide as the energy coursed through the station. "Like having your brain turned inside out and put on display." "That's because it kind of is," Riven replied. "But hey, at least we're not alone in our existential dread now." The lights flickered more violently, the station groaning as if in protest to what they were doing. And then, like the opening act of a particularly twisted concert, the alien signals began to waver, fluctuating under the barrage of human emotion. "We're hitting them hard," Riven reported, his eyes glued to the data streaming across the holographic display. "Their frequencies are all over the place." "Good," Talia said, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. "Let's see if they can dance to our tune." The aliens, who'd been treating their minds like an all-you-can-eat buffet, were suddenly being served a dish they couldn't stomach. The feedback loop created by their nightmares was working, causing the alien signals to falter and then crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. "It's working," Kylan shouted over the din of the station's protests. "We're pushing them back." The room was alive with the sound of energy arcing through the corridors, a symphony of chaos that somehow managed to be both terrifying and strangely beautiful. The aliens were retreating, unable to handle the overload of raw human emotion. "Keep it steady," Talia urged, even as the station trembled like a leaf in a storm. "We need to keep the pressure on." The cacophony rose to a crescendo, a swirling maelstrom of dreams and nightmares, each one a jagged piece of human psyche unleashed into the cosmos. It was messy and brutal, but it was working. "We're doing it," Ivo said, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. "We're actually doing it." "Never doubted us for a second," Mara quipped, though her voice was tight with tension. As the minutes dragged on, the alien signals began to recede, their coherence unraveling like a poorly made sweater. It was like they'd pulled the thread on a very ugly jumper and it was coming apart at the seams. "I think they're getting the message," Riven said, his voice ringing with disbelief. "They're pulling back." "Guess they didn't like what they found in our heads," Kylan said with a smirk. "Can't say I blame them." The station's shuddering began to subside, the energy levels stabilizing as the alien presence faded into the background of space. "Did we do it?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Talia gave a shaky laugh, the kind that usually accompanies narrowly avoided disasters. "I think we did." She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly as the realization settled over her. They'd done the impossible, turned their greatest fears into their greatest weapon. A cheer erupted from the crew, a triumphant shout that echoed through the metallic corridors of the station. It wasn't just a victory over the aliens. It was a victory over the doubts and fears that had plagued them. They'd faced the darkness within themselves and come out the other side, bruised but unbroken. "Wow," Ivo said, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe we pulled it off." "Yeah," Kylan said, his grin wide. "Turns out we're scarier than a bunch of aliens." "Who knew?" Riven, who'd spent the last few minutes ensuring that the aliens were indeed retreating and not just regrouping for a second assault, finally allowed himself to relax. "Looks like we gave them a taste of something they couldn't handle." "More like a full-course meal," Mara quipped, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. As the adrenaline began to fade, Talia felt the exhaustion settle in, heavy and insistent. They'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. There was no guarantee the aliens wouldn't come back, possibly with a new strategy in mind. But for now, they had a moment to breathe, a moment to celebrate the fact that they were still alive, still fighting. It was more than they'd expected when they'd started this crazy plan, and for now, it was enough. "Guess we'll have to keep on our toes," Talia said, looking around at her crew, her friends. "But at least we've proven one thing. Humanity's got a few tricks up its sleeve." The crew nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and determination. They'd done the impossible today, and while tomorrow might bring new challenges, today they'd won. And as long as they kept fighting, there was hope. "So, what now?" Ivo asked, glancing around as if expecting another crisis to pop up at any moment. "Now," Talia said, allowing herself a small, weary smile. "Now we celebrate, we've earned it." "With what?" Mara asked, raising an eyebrow. "Unless you count our terrible coffee as celebratory," Kylan chuckled. "Hey, nothing wrong with a victory toast, even if it is with sludge." Riven shrugged, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "I'll take sludge over alien annihilation any day." And so, gathered in the dimly lit mess hall with mugs of steaming sludge in hand, they toasted to their survival, their victory, and the indomitable spirit that had carried them through. It was a grim celebration, perhaps, but it was theirs. "To nightmares," Kylan said, raising his mug with a grin. "To humans being the scariest thing in the galaxy," Mara added, clinking her mug against his. "To not dying today," Ivo said, his eyes sparkling with relief. Talia smiled, feeling the warmth of camaraderie amidst the chaos. "And to tomorrow, whatever it brings." As they sipped their terrible coffee and shared stories of near misses and barely made plans, the Jovian Atmosphere Research Station felt a little less like a haunted house and a little more like home. For all its flaws and creaks, it was theirs. And for now, that was enough. The Jovian Atmosphere Research Station, or as everyone on board lovingly referred to it, the JARS, had finally quieted down after the alien retreat. Sure, the place still had all the charm of a damp basement in an old horror movie, but hey, at least it wasn't trying to rip their minds out anymore. Small victories, right, Doctor? Riven Astor leaned back in his chair, the one that creaked ominously whenever he moved, like it was considering a career change as a medieval torture device. He watched the holographic display settle into a calm, meaningless sequence of patterns. No more alien interference. For now. The crew was scattered around him, buzzing with the kind of low-level excitement that usually follows not getting killed in space. Kylan Thrace was up to his elbows in wires, muttering something about how the station was held together by duct tape and prayers. You know, standard engineer mumbo-jumbo. Think the universe got a little less horrifying, or are we just on a temporary break? Mara asked, plopping down next to Riven. Her voice was a mix of sarcasm and genuine curiosity, the kind that made you unsure if she wanted an actual answer or was just setting up a punchline. "Temporary, definitely temporary," Riven replied. "I mean, it's space. If it's not aliens, it's a hull breach or a malfunction or, I dunno, a coffee shortage. We're always one disaster away from a very dramatic obituary. Dramatic, sure. But imagine the headlines. Local scientists outwit cosmic horror with nightmares and terrible coffee," Mara quipped, raising an imaginary news banner with her hands. "Yeah, we really are a testament to human ingenuity," Riven said, smirking. "Who knew all we needed was caffeine and a few unresolved childhood traumas to save the day." Across the room, Talia Voss was orchestrating a half-hearted attempt at station repair. Her cheerful facade had slipped after the adrenaline rush, revealing a leader worn thin by responsibility but still standing, albeit on shaking legs. She barked orders with a voice that suggested she was used to people not listening, but they did, because somehow she made it work. "All right, people, let's patch this metal nightmare up before it decides to explore breaking apart as a new hobby," Talia called, her gaze scanning over the crew. We've got a lot to do before we can start thinking about basking in our own brilliance." Kylan grunted in agreement, his head buried in an open panel. "Give me a ship that doesn't feel like it's trying to choke on its own gears any day. At least I won't need a PhD in curse management. Why fix something if it's not broken, right?" Ivo piped up, trying to sound optimistic but coming off more like someone who'd just realized their pants were on fire. "Because when it's finally broken, it won't be us who gets vaporized, but the poor sods who think they're getting a fully functional research station," Kylan shot back. "We're not just scientists here, Ivo. We're scientific participants in a very lethal experiment." The station's symphony of hums and groans was slowly giving way to silence as systems rebooted and recalibrated. It was like listening to an orchestra of disgruntled robots learning to play together again. Talia clapped her hands, drawing attention back to her. "All right, crew, let's get things back in shape. We might have scared the crap out of those aliens, but that doesn't mean they won't come back with a vengeance. Or worse." Yelp reviews, Mara grinned. "Imagine that. Jars, 2 stars, cozy atmosphere, but nightmares aren't as palatable as they sound." Riven snorted, appreciating the levity even as he delved back into his console, recalibrating the brainwave blockers. Not that he wanted to weaponize their fears again anytime soon, but it was always nice to have options. "Speaking of nightmares," Riven said, glancing over at Talia. "Think we'll ever manage to get a good night's sleep aboard this place?" Talia shrugged, that forced smile back in place. "Sleep's overrated, right? Who needs dreams when we've got reality doing its best impression of a horror show?" "Amen to that," Kylan added, pulling himself out of the wiring like he just emerged from the trenches. "I'd kill for a dreamless sleep, preferably one without the threat of alien brain scooping." The crew chuckled, the sound a welcome reprieve from the tension of the past Iors. Riven took a deep breath, letting himself indulge in a rare moment of calm. The station, for all its quirks and faults, felt strangely like home, a dysfunctional, precarious home, but home nonetheless. As the crew busied themselves with repairs and maintenance, Riven found his mind wandering, replaying the day's events like a bad holovid. The aliens, with their unseen presence and insidious intent, had brought out the worst in them, or perhaps the best. It was hard to tell sometimes. He'd always been a fan of humanity's adaptability, their ability to face the unthinkable and find a way through, even if that way was cobbled together with chewing gum and blind optimism. It was inspiring, in a terrifying sort of way. "Hey, Riven, you still with us?" Mara asked, nudging him with an elbow. "You've got that look again, the one where you're plotting something devious." "Just thinking," Riven replied, "about how we managed to turn one of our biggest weaknesses, our nightmares, into a weapon. It's kind of poetic when you think about it." "Poetic, sure," Mara said, rolling her eyes. "More like poetic justice for those damn aliens. Who knew our neuroses could be so useful?" "Guess it's something only humans could pull off," Riven said, a smile tugging at his lips. "Turning a mess into a masterpiece. Or a disaster into a dinner party," Mara shot back, a mischievous glint in her eye. And wasn't that the truth? Humanity had a knack for surviving, for finding the absurdity in the chaos and laughing in the face of oblivion. It was something the aliens hadn't counted on, couldn't count on. Because while the universe was vast and filled with horrors unknown, humans had the one thing that set them apart: a sense of humor. "Well," Riven said, stretching his arms above his head, feeling the pop of his joints like musical notes in a broken symphony. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it head-on with a crappy cup of coffee in hand." "Damn straight," Kylan agreed, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Here's to more unexpected solutions and less dying horribly." The crew cheered once more, a ragtag assembly of mismatched souls who'd somehow found a way to make the chaos work in their favor. It wasn't perfect, but it was uniquely human. And for Riven, that was enough reason to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward into the unknown. As they settled into a semblance of routine, the station's lights flickered gently, a soft reminder of the universe's constant unpredictability. Yet, in that moment, they felt oddly at peace, their laughter echoing in the corridors like a defiant shout against the void. And so, with the alien threat neutralized, at least for today, the crew of the jars returned to their work, patching and repairing, readying themselves for whatever fresh hell space might throw at them next. For in the end, they were just human, flawed and fabulous, navigating the cosmos one chaotic step at a time. "Here's to surviving another day," Talia said, raising her mug in a salute to her crew to their tenacity and resilience. "To human nightmares," Mara added with a smirk, "the ultimate cosmic deterrent to us," Riven concluded, feeling strangely optimistic about the future. "May we always find a way, no matter how ridiculous." With that, they clinked their mugs together, a testament to human spirit and the power of absurdity. Because if there was one thing they'd learned from this ordeal, it was that being human was about more than just surviving. It was about finding the humor in the darkness and laughing anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep the nightmares at bay. For now, at least.